What's up guys, it's Eric. So about 2 years ago I made a video on Kodak Ektar. It was one of my most popular videos. It's got about 30,000 views on the site, which granted, it's not a ton. For me, it's a lot. When I made it, it was one of the first videos where I actually sat down, sketched out the idea ahead of time, did some serious editing, put it together, and I was pretty proud of it when I made it. That being said, it's got some problems. For starters, the audio levels were all screwed up in Premiere, so it plays really quietly. But most importantly, when I made that video, I really didn't like Akhtar at all. A lot of time has passed. I've shot a lot more, and at this point I've got a much better grasp on the film, and it's gone from being one of my least favorite films to probably my favorite color negative film. So what is Akhtar? How did this transition happen, and what do I think of it right now? Let's find out, shall we? Let's take this journey together. So what is Akhtar 100? Well, Akhtar is a color negative film manufactured by the Kodak Corporation out of Rochester, New York. Akhtar is actually a very modern film. The current version, and there was a version that was released, a decade earlier for 35mm, but the current version is as recent as like 2008. It's a very fine-grained film. Kodak says that it's ideal for scanning, for people who work with a hybrid workflow. What sets Akhtar apart from the other color negative films available on the market currently is saturation. So in general, with color negative film, you're going to be trading away that saturation in exchange for an extremely wide and generous, dynamic range and exposure latitude. So something like Portra 400, you can overexpose it or underexpose it by like 4 stops, and you're going to get a perfectly usable image no matter, which way you go. A lot of people actually prefer Portra when it's overexposed by 2 or 3 stops. It's a very unique look, but it's incredibly forgiving. The other side of that, however, is that with those color negative films, you're going to get a very muted color palette. You're going to get a very flat color palette, really nice skin tones, really kind of subtle pastel colors, which is great for, weddings, portraiture, things like that. Not as good if you're shooting something like landscapes. For this reason, landscape photographers who shoot film are generally going to shoot something like Velvia 50 or Velvia 100. They'll shoot slide film. Now, slide film has nowhere near the dynamic range of color negative film. In fact, it's got an extremely narrow dynamic range, narrower than even the least expensive digital camera, narrower than your cell phone. But it has these incredibly punchy, contrasty colors. So shooting something like Velvia is going to give a landscape photographer just an incredibly vivid, almost surreal level of color and contrast that's going to make their images, really explode, really pop. The downside, of course, is that you're going to need to use something like a neutral density filter or things to bring the highlights down and bring the shadows up, because otherwise you're going to block up those shadows, you're going to blow out those highlights. It's very difficult to shoot really contrasty scenes or scenes with bright highlights using slide film. And that's where Ektar comes in. Theoretically, Ektar is going to give you a little bit of both. You're going to get that expanded dynamic range that you'd get out of something like Portra, and you're also going to get the punchier, more vivid colors that you would get with something like Velvia. Does it achieve this? Yes and no. When I first started shooting Ektar, one of the biggest things I ran into immediately was that it didn't look like Velvia, and I kind of was going in hoping to get a color negative film that would look like Velvia, and Ektar does not. Ektar looks like Ektar. Images tend to take on kind of an almost, I'll say like poster art look where the cyans and the oranges and the reds take over. Now this can be corrected in post, it can be corrected while you're scanning the images, but in general, I was looking for kind of that Velvia hyper saturation, and you don't quite get that out of Ektar, but you do get colors that pop. And in certain circumstances, particularly direct sunlight, bright sunny days, you can create some really stunning images that would look washed out on something like Portra. So what I'd like to do now is go through some photos that I've taken with Ektar 100. This will give us a chance to see some of the kind of the positives, some of the negatives of the film, and it'll give you just sort of a general idea of how the film functions and what it looks like, and if it's something that appeals to you. Sound good? I hope so, because that's what we're gonna do. I want to start out with a photograph that I think really nicely demonstrates a lot of what Ektar 100 brings to the table. So this is a photo that I took about a month ago while hiking in the southern Adirondacks on a place called Hadley Mountain. This was taken on the Pentax 6x7 with the 105mm lens. Now this photograph stands out to me for a couple of reasons. The first and most obvious is just the incredible amount of saturation, present here. The leaves on the trees are vibrant, they're colorful, they've got just a beautiful look to them that's going to rival anything you would get out of something like Velvia 50. The other thing, though, that really stands out is the sky. Now, had I shot this on something like Velvia 50, I almost certainly would have blown out the highlights in the sky, and you'd be looking at a white background behind the trees. Had I shot it on something like Portra, the sky would certainly have that dynamic range, but the scene wouldn't have the vibrance and the pop that it has, color-wise. So to me, this is a great example of that thin line that Ektar walks, that balance it strikes, where you get that really vibrant color, but you don't necessarily have to sacrifice dynamic range. And it's a good example of what makes Ektar exciting and fun to use. Here's a photo of Casey in Buffalo's Inner Harbor. Now, I took this on my RB67 a couple of years ago, so obviously this is 6x7 Ektar. This photo is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Number one is that this was the first film photo I posted to Flickr that got some pretty substantial feedback. It really caught me off guard, actually, at the time. People seem to like it. I didn't understand it entirely, but looking back at it, it is kind of a cool photo. The second thing about this that's sort of interesting is that it demonstrates Ektar's exposure latitude pretty nicely. I'm not entirely sure, but just looking at it, I imagine this image is probably overexposed by a couple of stops. And, you've lost the detail in the sky, which is sort of unfortunate, but it looks great. And in direct sunlight, too. It's got a really cool look to it, a really gentle, pastel, kind of creamy look that's certainly appealing. The most interesting thing to me, though, and the thing that stands out, is that before I started shooting Ektar, I'd read from a number of sources that it was totally unsuitable for shooting portraits, and that it would add, a lot of pink to people's skin tones. Now, I've found that can be the case, but it's generally more of an issue when you underexpose the film, in my experience. Now, here's that pink skin. Certainly not as bad as something you'd get out of like Velvia if you use it to take pictures of people, but when the film is a little bit underexposed, you're gonna get that kind of look. It's not terrible, but it's not ideal if you're shooting portraiture or something like that. Still, it's kind of a cool looking photo. Now, I like this photo a lot because it demonstrates how Ektar handles the color blue. Blues just look beautiful on Ektar. I took this in overcast skies, of course, in Lake George a couple of months ago, or maybe about a month ago, on my Pentax 6x7. I just love the way the colors look. Everything from his coat to the water to the foliage on the other side of the lake there to the mountains. The dynamic range you can see is beautiful in the sky and the mountains there. One thing that stands out to me in this photo is when you compare it with something like Velvia, the way Ektar has it's certainly a contrasty film, but it's got a certain gentleness to the way it handles tone, and you can see it on the sidewalk there, the leaves. It's very difficult to put into words, but I think you kind of know it when you see it, and it's beautiful. I'm a big fan of this photo. I like this one quite a bit. This one here is actually one of the very first photos I ever took using Ektar 100, and this was taken with my Minolta X370. You can see I've got my crown graphic set up in the foreground there, and I was waiting for the sun to drop down a little lower so I could get the light I wanted for a large format photo. This place has actually since been torn down, and they built a park there, but I really enjoyed taking photos here because it was so weird. It looked like something out of like Mad Max to me. But yeah, this photo really demonstrates, at least to me, that sort of balance it strikes between that dynamic range and that saturation. The colors are a little more muted in this one. It could be a function of how I scanned it. I'm not entirely sure, but the reds still pop and the blues still pop, and it definitely has that kind of, like I said, that kind of poster art look to it that I'm a big fan of now. It's something I had to come around on, but I appreciate it. I enjoy it. It's a cool photo, and actually it's a pretty nice looking photo from a camera that would cost you about probably $40 for the whole setup. So yeah. Just look at this, right? I mean, look at the colors. Look at the reds.
Look at the blues. I just think, you can see the dynamic range in the sky there. It's just a beautiful image. And when you get in really nice and close on this one, you can see the detail. And I haven't mentioned it so much, but Ektar has, a very, very fine grain. So when you scan it, if you have a good enough scanner, and I've just, obviously I just have a flatbed, so I'm not getting all the detail I could, but you can get some very, very high quality images out of these guys scanned and probably do some really beautiful prints. But yeah, I mean, I shot some photos this day on Portra as well, and the Ektar photos are far and away superior. They just have kind of this color to them that's really magical and great. So last but certainly not least is the photo that convinced me to give Ektar a second chance. So I had just purchased my 6x7 Pentax, and I was visiting my family, and I had a roll of Ektar just lying around, left over from God knows when. So I loaded it up, was walking around the Elmwood Village waiting for my friend Jeff to meet me for a beer, and I snapped this photo. And when I got it back, it's obviously it's just a photo of a mural on the side of a restaurant, but something about the way the colors looked, the fine grain, the incredible amount of resolution in the image. If you look at my Pentax 6x7 video, I go into depth on this image and kind of dissect what I think about it. But just looking at the colors, the way the sky looks, the colors in the mural, it's got this totally unique, really beautiful aesthetic that really captured my interest and captured my attention. So yeah, I love it. Can't explain why, but I just think it looks great. And I want to finish up with just a few photos submitted by viewers. I just picked a couple that I think really show off what Ektar can do when it's handled well. If you aren't familiar with my viewer submission series, I urge you to check it out. I'll put a link to it at the end of the video. It's a lot of fun.
So there you have it, Ektar 100. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, as always, leave them down below in this magical space that Google has provided for you. If you liked the video, of course, thumb it up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you really, really liked it, I do have a Patreon, but no pressure at all. Just tossing it out there. Thank you to everyone who attended the live stream a couple of days ago. That was a lot of fun. We'll definitely be doing more stuff along those lines soon. And a lot of more content coming up. Some really cool ideas were brought up in the live stream and people have come forward. So hopefully some more collaborations and some really neat kind of interactive stuff with the community. I look forward to it. So thank you guys for watching. As always, stay safe. I will see you soon.